Okay, I'll get right into this. I know we're kind of up against our time here, so I'll try to get through this as best I can here. I want to start with this. I think when we think about ourselves as coaches, okay, and what our coaching style is, I think probably almost all of us gravitate one way or another here. We talk about like old school versus new school, okay? Maybe some of us are more in the middle, some of us are more old school, some of us are more new school. Okay, if you go on Twitter, it feels like it's like a civil war, right? Like you got Jeff Fry and Kyle Bodie or Teacher Man or whatever. Just it's like 75% of my timeline every day, arguing over which is better. Okay, for me, regardless of which end of the spectrum that you fall in, right? Like operating in extremes is generally never good. Right? Like, so if I'm the old school guy that just like wants to stick my head in the sand and just refuse to change at all and just say, listen, this is the way I was taught, this way we're going to do it. All right? That's probably not the best method. Okay? Doesn't mean you need to go all the way to the other end of the spectrum. Okay? Because I think that's equally bad. Right? You got these people out there that think like we can just turn a TrackMan on and it's going to teach our pitchers how to pitch. Okay? I know the thing costs a lot of money, unfortunately. Right? It doesn't do that. Okay? One of the things to me that like is kind of at the center of it is like analytics, right? Like we hear that term all the time, and it's like kind of divisive. Like you got people that are just anti-analytics, and then you got people that are all in on analytics. Okay, and if I ask guys to raise their hands in here and said, hey, who in here would say that they're anti-analytics? There's probably some of you are going to probably raise your hand, and that's fine. Okay, but if I asked you the question, if I rephrased it and I said, how many guys in here are anti-information? Who's going to raise their hand? Probably no one, right? Like information is almost never a bad thing, okay, as long as we're using it correctly, okay? And at the end of the day, that's all that analytics are, or data is, okay? It's just more information, all right? Some of the information we're going to gather with our eyes, some of it may be in numbers, okay? But what it all boils down to is it's information, okay? It's another tool that we have in our toolbox to help our guys get better. So I'm going to kind of cover three things. If you don't have access to a lot of technology, which is probably the category that most of you guys in this room fit into, okay, how can you utilize data in your program? Okay. Second, if you do have access to some of that stuff, and I know that's probably the minority of people in here, okay, but what are some of the most important metrics that you can get from that stuff, and how do you interpret that? Okay. I know a lot of you guys most of you guys probably don't have TrackMan for sure. Probably don't have Rapsodo, maybe some of you do. Okay, even if you don't have it, all right, I do think it's important that you understand it to a degree, and I'll talk about that, why that's the case in a minute. All right, and then how can you use the data that you gather to guide your player development? Okay, the value of data. All right, a couple different things. First of all, and Coach Lee talked about this a little bit, right? It helps you to objectively measure the things that you value, okay? Coach Lee used the term, I actually have it on here too, I didn't know you was going to use it, but if you treasure it, measure it, okay? So if it's something that's really important to you, rather than just like hoping that you're good at it, why not figure out for sure, are we good at this, okay? Look, it could be as simple, when Coach Kingston and I have been together for, I think this is going on 15 or 16 years, okay? When we got to South Carolina, he had what he called like the 3 pillars of the program. So it was play hard, play smart, be disciplined, okay? Very kind of subjective things, okay? But are there ways that you can kind of try to quantify that to verify that you're living up to those standards? So just an example, one of the things that we would do a lot is we would get home to first times for like an entire scrimmage. And if there was any time that a guy took more than 5 seconds to get to first base, regardless of the play result, okay, at the end of practice, we would mention it, right? And then guys would go run, the whole entire team would run sprints for that, okay? So again, it's just trying to find objective ways to measure things that are important to you, okay? Second thing, today's players expect you to speak their language, okay? Even though you're grew up in a totally different era than they did, they want you to talk the language that they talk, okay? And so if you don't at least have, even if you're not utilizing this stuff every day, okay? They are probably some, right? They may go to their private pitching coach, right? They play for their travel team. They go to these tournaments where this stuff pops up on the scoreboard, okay? So whether or not it's important to you, it's important to them, right? And if you don't at least understand some of this stuff, you risk losing guys, right? And that's the last thing that we want to do as a coach, because then we become ineffective, right? If we lose those guys. Establish baselines and track growth, okay? Right? Not only is this good for you as a coach to figure out, like, hey, is the stuff that we're doing actually helping guys get better? Okay? So it's important for you to figure out, like, hey, we need to try something different because this isn't working. Okay? How do we know that if we don't know where they started and then where they are now? Okay? And it's hard to do that without having something a little bit more concrete to base that on. All right? And then the tracking the growth, that's fun for the players, right? The more that they can see themselves getting better and growing, right? Hey, I started on the first day and my exit velocity was 85, okay? A month later, it's 89. And then a month after that, it's 92, okay? When they can see that growth, all right, that's important for them. That helps them, that keeps them excited, it keeps them coming back, it keeps them bought in. Okay? And that gets me to the next part. Getting your players to buy in is important. It doesn't matter. Like, you could be the greatest coach in the world, you can have the best ideas in the world, but if you can't get your players to buy into what you're trying to get them to do, then it's all wasted. Okay? And guys, look, today's kid is different, right? And every generation says this, right? But today's kid is different than probably when you were a kid, right? When you were a kid, if your coach told you to do something, you did it. You didn't ask twice, because he told you to do it, okay? Today's kid is not that way. They're a lot more skeptical, right? They ask a lot more questions. You tell them something, and the second that they leave practice, they go to YouTube, and they look and see if what you're telling him is what the guy on the YouTube video is saying, okay? So we have to understand that, and I think one of the ways that you can get guys to buy in is if you have data to show them, like we were just talking about. Look, this is what was going on last week. And then we started doing this drill, and now look what's happening. Okay, when you can show that to that skeptical player, it helps him become less skeptical, and it gets him bought into what you're trying to get him to do. Get to the answer quicker. This is a huge one for us, and it's probably an even bigger one for you because we're just so limited in the time that we have. Okay, right? Like, our guys have to go to class. We're limited by NCAA rules. Right now, we're trying to get ready to play a season, and we get our guys, we get 4 hours of baseball skill instruction a week. Okay? And then in about 3.5 weeks, we're going to be playing games that matter. Okay? So we have to maximize that time as much as we can. And so when we're just, we identify that a guy has an issue, and we come up with a potential solution. We're just throwing a bunch of stuff up against the wall. We're trying a lot of things until we find something that works. That takes time. Okay? If I have ways to get to that answer on the first try and not have to wait for the third or fourth thing that I try to work, that just saves me a ton of time. Okay? So being efficient in getting guys to be able to do the things you want to do is huge. And I know for you guys, you have less time with your guys than we do. Okay? So efficiency is key. And then I touched on this a little bit already, but make it fun, right? I think guys like this stuff. They like when we take batting practice and we don't have the TrackMan stuff on the scoreboard, guys are like bored. I know you guys don't have the ability to do that, right? That's not my point. But it gets guys engaged. I remember when we first got to South Carolina, we got somebody to donate a HitTrax to us. And I'm telling you, at the time it was new. Okay, this has kind of since worn off a lot. But at that point in time, when we put that HitTrax in the cages, it was amazing how many more guys. You'd walk by the cage, and there was always 4 or 5 guys in there hitting, right? Because it was fun, right? The more fun that guys have, the more engaged they're going to be, the more you're going to get out of that practice, and ultimately the more you're going to accomplish. Okay. All right. Where do you start? I think the first thing that you have to do is ask yourself what is important to you, right? I can't sit here and tell you the things that you need to be measuring. You need to figure that out based upon the things that you value, right? And probably a lot of it for the people in this room is going to be the same, but there's also going to be some things that are maybe a little bit different. Figure out what tools you have access to, right? Like we're operating in a different world than all of you guys are, or probably 99.9% of you are, right? We have access to things that you don't have access to. I don't think that's going to keep you from doing most of the things that we're talking about here. You just have to get a little bit more creative. You got to do it in a little bit of a different way. But I think you can do a lot of the same things. Start small, right? You start trying to measure 37 things all at the same time. You're gonna drive yourself crazy. You're gonna stay up till 1 in the morning, and it's gonna end up being counterproductive. Okay? Start with a few small things that are really important to you. Start measuring those things, sharing it with your players, right? And then build from there. Okay? The last thing that I would encourage is just remember that the only thing that's worse than no data is bad data. Right? So you have to just make sure that if you're measuring something, right, that you're measuring it correctly and that you understand what it means, okay? Because if we're interpreting it wrong or we're not measuring it right, maybe we're actually hurting guys more than we're helping them. Okay, what to measure? Okay, I touched on the left here. I've got the far left, the core values thing. These are some of the more subjective stuff. Okay, I talked about the playing hard thing, getting the home to first times. Okay. Another one of the ones that we would talk about a lot was playing smart. And so another thing that we would do during inter squads was we would track mental mistakes. Okay, same thing. After the scrimmage was over, when we're breaking that down, right? We'd go through, hey, here are all the mental mistakes that we made today, and then the guys maybe had a sprint for every mental mistake that they made. Okay, getting into some of the hitting stuff. Okay, some of this is stuff that is a lot easier for us to measure. Okay, I still put it on here just so you can kind of see some of the things we're measuring. Some of this stuff is stuff that would be fairly easy for you guys to measure. Okay, 90th percentile exit velo. That's basically rather than use max exit velo, we'll use 90th percentile just because sometimes you'll have a guy that maybe one time hits a ball 110. Okay, and then he doesn't hit anything harder than 105. Okay, it's probably not fair to hold him to that standard of 110. Okay, maybe it was a misread on the TrackMan. Okay, or on the radar gun. So we'll use that. You can see there Division I average, and then what elite Division I guys do, just to kind of give you a barometer here. You'll have to probably adjust this somewhat at the high school level, but at least it gives you a starting point. Average exit velo. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. Again, obviously we can do this with TrackMan. You guys can do this in batting practice with a radar gun. Okay? You can turn the radar gun, if you have a stalker, you turn it to the output, and you can get ball off the bat in BP. Okay? Hard hit percentage. Okay, we can do this. We use 95% as the cutoff. Okay? Obviously, you guys probably don't have access to TrackMan data, but you can eyeball this, right? You don't necessarily need to know that it was 90 miles an hour or 92 miles an hour. You know what a hard hit ball is and what a not hard hit ball is. So this is something that you can track just based on your own kind of personal opinion. Zone contact's a big one, right? So when we're talking about bat to ball skills, the ability to make contact on pitches in the zone. Guys are going to swing and miss when they go out of the zone. Okay, we know that. Right? But we shouldn't be swinging and missing very often in the zone. Chase percentage. Okay, we talk about plate discipline. I think if you look at it from an offensive perspective, a hitting perspective, the thing that we've learned or we've been able to has aided our coaching the most on the hitting side with the TrackMan data is all on the plate discipline. Okay, I mean, exit velo, everybody likes to talk about how hard we hit the ball, and it is important. Okay, but being able to, we've all talked about forever, it's important to swing at good pitches. Okay, but it's all, we're in the dugout, usually on the side, right? We can't see in the middle of the game a pitch that looks like a strike. Maybe it's not a strike. Okay, we don't know from the dugout. All right? The fact that we can know after the game exactly where a pitch is and whether a guy swung at it or not, that's done a ton for us in terms of being able to coach play discipline. Okay? you might be able to stick a player behind home plate and and kind of chart that. That's probably one of the tougher things to do. As far as stuff that you can chart, okay, from a plate discipline standpoint, you can keep track of swing percentage. Here's one thing I will tell you, okay, and when I first started getting into this stuff, this number floored me. At the Division I level, only 44% of pitches are thrown in the strike zone. Okay, let me say that one more time. So at the Division I level, 44% of pitches are actually thrown in the zone. Okay, I'm not talking about whether they're called strikes or called balls. I'm just talking about, is the pitch inside that strike zone? Okay, so if you think about that from an offensive perspective, if you've got a guy that's swinging 60% of the time, all right, what's the likelihood that that guy is swinging at only good pitches to hit? Pretty low, right? So what I would tell you is that I don't know that there is necessarily a right or wrong answer for how often you should be swinging, okay? But what I can tell you is that if you're on the extreme ends of the spectrum, that's probably bad, right? If you're a guy that's swinging 30% of the time, that's probably too low. Okay, if you're a guy that's swinging 60 or 70% of the time, I can almost assure you that's too high. So by keeping track of swing percentage, that's going to give you an idea of which guys are too aggressive and which guys aren't aggressive enough. Okay, pitches per plate appearance, same concept, right? So at the Division I level, 3.85 is average. Okay, guys that are over 4 pitches per plate appearance, those guys usually have pretty elite plate discipline. Okay. Walk to strikeout ratio, okay? Ideally, we should be walking we should be walking 75% as much as we strike out. So like if I strike out 10 times, right, I should be walking at least 7 for those 10 strikeouts, okay? Or 7.5, can't walk a half the time. Battle average, okay, this is one that, that I came up with. We're talking about 2-strike hitting. Okay? If you value 2-strike hitting, how do you really say who's a good 2-strike hitter and who's not? Right? Because just because you strike out doesn't necessarily strike out maybe a lot or at a higher level than you want to, doesn't necessarily mean that you're bad at hitting with 2 strikes. It may just mean that you get to 2 strikes more often than other people. Okay? Maybe you do a pretty good job with 2 strikes, but the numbers tell us that the more you get to 2 strikes, the more you're going to strike out. Okay? So one way that I came up with that would kind of evaluate how good of a job does the guy do once he gets to 2 strikes is how many more pitches on average do you see once the count reaches 2 strikes? Okay, so strike 1, strike 2. Okay, how many more pitches can you see? Okay, average is 2.43 if you're 3 or better, right? You're a pretty good 2-strike hitter. Okay, quality at bats, probably everybody knows what quality at bats are. That's an easy thing to track. On the pitching side, velocity, right? Velocity is important. Okay, I would encourage you to track it because not only can it help you see like when guys are making jumps, which obviously are maybe helping reaffirm some of the things you're doing in the development side, but it also can be indicators of fatigue or maybe potential injury. Right? You got a guy that his fastball is usually 88 to 90. Right? And in his last outing, he was like 85, 86. And the next time he goes out there, maybe it's 84, 85. Okay, we need to probably figure out what's going on there. If you're not tracking that, right, you may not necessarily realize that until it's too late. Zone percentage, just what percentage of pitches are thrown in the zone. Again, easy for us to track, probably a little bit harder for you. Same thing with competitive pitch percentage. That's any pitch that's within like 1 baseball of the plate. Right? So the idea there is like we want the hitter to have to make a real decision every time. If it's a pitch that he takes out of the hand, right, that doesn't put any stress on him. That's like almost a non-decision. He just takes that immediately. Right? We want to make that guy have to make a stressful decision each time. Strike percentage is obvious, right? We want to try to be at 65%. That's the goal. Okay, Division I average was 61. If we're at 65, you're a pretty elite strike thrower. Okay, first pitch strike percentage. This one's key. Okay, I'm just going to give you a couple numbers here that I thought were pretty eye-opening. 67% of at-bats that end in a strikeout begin with a first pitch strike. Okay? 67% of at-bats that end in the strikeout start with the first pitch strike. On the opposite side, 74% of at-bats that end in a walk start with the first pitch ball. Okay? So if you want to increase your strikeout numbers, throw first pitch strikes. Okay? If you don't want to walk guys, throw first pitch strikes. Okay? Again, you can see their Division I average was just under 60%. If we're at like elite guys are at close to 70% or even better. Okay? Another thing that was pretty staggering here. So first pitch strike, you throw a first pitch strike, the expected batting average drops by 51 points, going from 1-0 to 0-1. Okay? The other biggest swing count would be 1-1. Okay? So if you throw a strike in a 1-1 count, so you go from instead of being 2-1, you're 1-2. Okay, you've got an 82-point drop in batting average after that. Okay? So from a pitching standpoint, 0-0 counts, 1-1 counts. We have to win those. Okay? So that's something else that you can track. Like how often do we win 0-0 and 1-1 counts? Because if you win 0-0 and you win 1-1 counts, all right, you're going to be in really good shape as a pitching staff. Okay? Early percentage is any time that we end an at-bat in 3 pitches or less. Okay? So if that at-bat is over within 3 pitches, we get credit as that's success from an early standpoint. Okay, ahead, anytime we get to an 0-2 or a 1-2 count, okay, we get credit for being ahead. If you add those together, if your guys are at 75% of at-bats, they do one or the other of those, right? They either end the at-bat in 3 pitches or less, or they get to 0-2, 1-2. Okay, if they can do that 75% of the time, they're going to be really, really good. Okay, again, those are all things that you can track if you want to. Okay, you don't need TrackMan to do almost all the things there on the pitching side. Okay, I skipped over leadoff out. This is another big one. So if you get the first batter of the inning out, there's a 16% chance that team is going to score a run in that inning. Okay, if that guy reaches base, depending on if he gets the first, second, or third, right, you have somewhere between a 49 and an 88% chance that they're going to score a run. All right, so think about that swing, right? You could be, if that guy hits a double or a triple, right, there's probably close to a 60 or 70 or more % chance that they're going to score that. If you get that guy out, there's a 16% chance that they score. So again, getting that leadoff hitter out is big. Okay, so I'm gonna talk here, and I'll be relatively brief on this, okay? Because I know most of you guys don't have access to this. That being said, I mentioned earlier, I do think it's important that you understand this stuff, though. Even if you're not going to use this every day, right? Your players are going to they're going to probably see this stuff at some point in time. They're going to talk about it. You need to be able to have intelligent conversations with guys about this stuff, okay? It might just simply be you being able to explain to them that what they're doing is not the right thing to be doing, okay? But if you don't understand this stuff when they start talking about it, it's hard to have that conversation. So just a couple things. Induced vertical break. So when we talk about, particularly, we talk about this a lot with fastballs. Okay, but all it's really telling us is how a pitch is moving vertically. Okay, the higher that number is, the less a pitch is dropping. Okay, the lower the number is, the more it's dropping. Okay, so when we think about it from a fastball standpoint, okay, we're talking about fastball. If 16 is average, so the average fastball has 16 inches of induced vertical break. Okay, so guys that have more than that, those are guys whose ball has carry, right, or ride. It drops less than the average fastball. So as a hitter, your brain is kind of hardwired to expect the ball to do a certain thing, okay? And so when that ball drops less than my brain thinks it's going to drop, it makes it harder to hit, okay? On the other side of things, like if I'm a guy that throws a sinker, okay, so I want that vertical break number to be lower. I want that ball going downward. Okay? So guys that have 10 inches or less of induced vertical break, those are sinker guys. Okay? Ideally, if they're 5 or below, they have a pretty good sinker. Okay? The guys that are kind of stuck in the middle, right? They don't have carry to their fastball. They don't really have sink. Those are the guys that we kind of call like dead zone fastball guys. The guy, everybody's seen the guy that throws like 92 and he gets rocked, right? It's like guys come back to the dugout and like, man, that does not seem like 92. That's probably why, right? That guy has a very hittable fastball. The velocity is good, which matters, right? But it's not the only thing that matters, okay? On the other side of things, right? We had a guy a few years ago, Brett Carey. Now, by the end of his career, the velocity was pretty good. But for most of his career, he was like a 90 to 92 guy. Okay, so at our level, it's average to below average velocity. Nobody could hit his fastball, okay, because it had unbelievable carry, right? Like it was like 23, 24 inches of induced vertical break, okay? Horizontal break, the exact opposite. Just tells us how is the ball moving side to side, okay? So again, going back, like that guy that throws that 4-seam fastball that has carry, that number is probably pretty normal. Normal is like somewhere between 8 and 11 inches. Okay, that's like a little bit of, everybody has like, I should say everybody. Most guys have like a little bit of natural run to the arm side, but that's pretty standard. You start to get 14 or more, that has like the hitters are coming back saying, man, that thing's running. Okay, some guys like with real sinkers will get up all the way to like 18 to 20. Okay, that's huge horizontal movement. Okay, when you start to get closer to 0, okay, that's when a ball has cut, so it's got glove side. All right, so that guy that throws that, like, kind of gets to the side of his fastball, gets a little bit of that side spin on the fastball, and it starts to kind of go that way. You'll see a really low horizontal. Okay. Now I should mention when we talk about horizontal, okay, and it says that on there, lefties are flip-flops. So for lefties, it'll be a negative number, right? Because all the negative number tells you is that the ball is moving towards first base. The positive number means it's moving towards third base. Okay. So lefties and righties are going to be flip-flopped. Okay. Vertical approach angle. This is a big one. This is I think Monty talked about this a little bit in terms of like the angle the ball's coming in at. The average pitch, okay, now this is going to vary based on location, okay, but if we're talking about like a pitch in the middle, vertical middle of the zone, okay, that pitch comes in at about like 5.5 degrees, okay. So a pitch that has less than that, so like you start to get to like 5 or less, 4, that pitch is very flat, okay. You start to get more than 5.5, that pitch is steep, okay. General rule of thumb, and this is again far from perfect, but the guys that have those flat fastballs, where do they want to pitch? They want to pitch up. Okay? They're going to get a lot of swings and misses underneath, and they're going to get a lot of pop-ups and weak contact. Okay? The guys that are steep, right? They want to pitch down. Okay? They want to magnify that downhill. Everybody's. You think about that big, tall guy, 6'6" guy that just kind of throws that fastball that's straight downhill. Okay? That guy's going to have a lot more success down in the zone because it magnifies that angle. The more he pitches up, the flatter that pitch gets, the more it is on, more it's like what the hitter expects it to be. Okay? All right, I'm going to be brief on this. Spin. Okay? Spin rate, everybody's probably familiar with what it is. Okay? It's just how fast is the ball spinning. Okay? Generally speaking, higher spin is better, okay? Generally speaking, but, okay, all the spin is not the same. So just because a guy has like a really high spin rate, that doesn't necessarily mean it's great. So I just have an example on here. So at the big league level, this was like a year or two ago. So Corbin Burns had a 4-seam fastball spin rate of over 2,600. That's really high, okay, right? Average is like 2,200. Okay, so he was way above average, one of the highest spinning fastballs in the big leagues. Okay, Colin Poche was he was very average in terms of his fastball spin, just under 2,300. Okay, the difference was Colin Poche's fastball was first in vertical movement. It had more carry than any pitcher in the big leagues. Okay, Corbin Burns, even though he had the really high spin rate, he was 348 in the big leagues in fastball movement. Look at the difference in their swing and miss on the fastball. O'Shea had a 34% swing and miss rate. Corbin Burns had a 20% swing and miss rate on his fastball. Okay, so just because you have a high spin rate doesn't necessarily mean that that's a great pitch, or that it even necessarily matters that much. Okay, so what matters probably more than that is spin efficiency. Okay, so that's like how much of the spin on the ball is actually making the ball move. So you've got three types of spin. Okay, so you've got side spin, so the ball's spinning this way. Okay, or for a lefty this way. Okay, you've got top spin and back spin. So like a four-seam fastball is almost all back spin. Top spin, you think about like a 12-6 curveball, is a lot of top spin. Okay, the third type of spin is gyro spin. It's like bullet spin, okay, or a football spin. Okay, that spin does not help movement. Okay, so all spin efficiency tells you is like what percentage of the spin is not gyro spin. So the point here being, Corbin Burns is a cut fastball guy. So what he's done is he got rid of it, throwing that four seam, and now he just throws cutters. Okay? So his spin efficiency is low. So when he was trying to throw that four seam fastball, it just didn't move the same way that Colin Poche's did. So, you know, all spin is not the same. Okay? And we don't have to spend a ton more time on that. But so what are we looking for when we look at this stuff? Okay, one thing would be consistency. Okay? Guys that have a hard time commanding the ball. Okay? A lot of times, there's a lot of reasons for that, right? But one of the reasons, oftentimes one of the reasons is because the movement of the ball is very inconsistent, right? If I throw one fastball that's straight and carries, and then I throw the next fastball and it runs and sinks, how in the world do I know where to start that pitch if I don't even know what the ball is going to do? Okay? You don't necessarily need a TrackMan, right? Your eyes can tell you when this is happening. Okay? So when you have a guy that has super inconsistent movement on a particular pitch, we have to fix that before we can expect that guy to command the ball at an elite level. Okay? So one of the things, more than anything, we're just chasing consistency. Okay? The second thing, the biggest thing I think that all of these numbers do is they help you as a coach and the player have a really good understanding of what your stuff does and how to use it. Okay? There's plenty of examples at the big league level of guys not changing their stuff at all. The velocity stays the same, right? But they learn how to use the stuff they have better, and it makes them better. Okay? So, you know, just a couple of examples. If your best pitch is your fastball, okay, but you're throwing your fastball only 50% of the time, all right, we're wasting that. You need to throw that pitch more. Okay? So, from a usage standpoint, are we using our best pitches enough? Okay? So, are we using stuff appropriately? The other big thing is location or command. Like, again, we're going to go back to the examples we were using before. Like, if you're a guy that has fastball with carry, right, but you're pitching down in the zone, you may not be having success. That doesn't mean your fastball's bad. You're just using it wrong, right? Get that guy to pitch up in the zone more, and maybe he has more success, okay? On the other side, if you got a guy that's throwing sinkers, and he's living at the belt, right, that sinker is not nearly as effective. But if we can get that guy down at the knees throwing that same pitch, right, then he can have more success. He didn't change anything other than just his plan, his approach. Okay? The other thing we're looking for is we want stuff that complements each other well. Okay? So in other words, let's say I'm a lower slot guy that throws a sinker. Okay? That big 12-6 curveball that pops up out of my hand, that probably doesn't pair very well with my fastball. Okay? That hitter immediately sees that breaking ball pop up. It's different than the fastball. It's easier for him either to hit that hanger or lay off the one that's not a strike. Okay? You know, now you see in the big leagues, like those guys that are throwing those sinkers, they're throwing the flatter sweeping slider. Okay? Because to the hitter, they see it in that same tunnel. One goes this way, the other one goes that way. Okay? So we want stuff that fits together. Okay? Again, TrackMan helps, like a Rapsodo will help you do that, right? But you can see this stuff with your eyes, right? You don't have to have a TrackMan or Rapsodo. You can figure a lot of this out on your own. Okay? The last thing is that just the idea that what we're really looking for is we want to be different. Okay? Different is good. As a hitter, right, your brain is programmed to expect, when you see certain things, you expect the ball to do certain things in return. Okay? When what actually happens kind of defies that, it makes hitting really hard. Okay? You look at a guy like Mariano Rivera made a career throwing a pitch that moved so late that the hitter would see it, and when he had to make a decision on whether he was going to swing or not, right, he thought the ball was going to do one thing, and then all of a sudden at the last second that thing cuts, and the guy's in the Hall of Fame. Okay? So if we can find ways to do things that are outliers, that's what we want as a pitcher. Okay, just a couple things here. So when we talk about specifically about fastballs and breaking balls, from a fastball perspective, velocity is still king, right? Like if the harder we throw, the more margin for error that we have, right? Your guys that throw really hard, you have guys that are in the upper 80s or the low 90s, they're going to get away with mistakes that your guy that throws 82, 83 is just not going to get away with. Okay? So at the end of the day, obviously, we would like to develop velocity. We just have to do it the right way. Okay? Movement is more important than spin. Okay? So if you do have access to any of this stuff, or your players are talk about this stuff, like spin is great, but at the end of the day, if the ball is moving the way you want it to move, who cares what the spin is? Matthew Becker is a guy that Matt talked about earlier that we have. He's got an elite carry on his fastball, well over 20 inches when he's right. Okay? His spin rate is barely over 2,000. Sometimes it's less than that. Okay? It doesn't matter. Who cares that his spin rate is 1950 if the guy can't hit it, right? And if the ball's doing what we want it to do. So all things being equal, if you took two guys that were exactly the same in every category, one guy had better spin than the other, we'll take the guy with the better that can spin the ball better. Okay? But that's assuming everything else is exactly the same. Okay? The other thing is the better we understand the guy's stuff, in particular what his fastball does, we can kind of bucket guys into guys who need to command the zone like more vertically versus the guys that need to command the zone more horizontally. Matthew Becker's a guy where we don't spend a ton of time talking to him about pitching to the corners. It's more about, hey, let's attack the plate, and if we miss, let's miss in the upper part of the zone where guys are going to have a hard time hitting it. Okay? It just simplifies it for him, right? He doesn't have to worry about both. Okay? Now there's other guys that do have to worry more about that. All right? He's not one of them. Breaking balls. So all of the data says that the most important thing on a breaking ball is velocity. The harder you throw a breaking ball, the more effective it's going to be. Okay? Understanding that, there's almost always a trade-off. If you want to throw a breaking ball harder, you're going to have less movement. Okay? And you have to get your pitchers to understand that. Okay? Less movement, just because a breaking ball moves a lot, doesn't mean it's a good pitch. Like every pitcher wants to throw that breaking ball, and he wants to see it move. Okay? But I'm telling you, right, that breaking ball sometimes that has just a little bit of movement, right, and it's harder, the hitter sees that pitch out of the hand, it's in the same tunnel as the fastball, they think it's a fastball, they swing at it like it's a fastball, and you get better results. That big, huge breaking ball, there's two issues with it. Number one, it's easier for the hitter to identify, okay, because it looks different almost right away. It has to. In order to create that big movement, it has to come out of that tunnel. The second thing is it's harder to command. That breaking ball that moves a ton, it's harder to throw it for strikes. Okay? So don't be afraid of trying to get guys to throw those breaking balls harder and shrink down the movement. Okay? Because it's hard to have both. I mean, even in the big leagues, those guys that throw the big sweeping slider, they rarely throw that pitch over 82 or 83 miles an hour. Okay? But the guys that throw those sliders, like the short slider, they can get that thing up over 90 miles an hour. Okay? You know, the breaking ball, again, I touched on this a second ago, it should complement their arm slide and their fastball. Okay? Matt touched on this. If they throw multiple breaking balls, just make sure they're different. Okay? It doesn't do a guy any good to throw 2 breaking balls that basically become the same pitch. If that's the case, just throw 1. Okay? So we had a guy, Austin Williamson, and I followed with him all year last year because he threw a cutter and a slider. If you looked at them on TrackMan, they were the exact same pitch. But the cutter was like 85, and the slider was 78. They moved exactly the same. So if that's the case, why not throw the one that's 85 miles an hour every single time? You don't need the slider. Okay, now, if they're 2 completely different pitches, then there may be a place for it. Okay? All right, I'm going to end with this. Paul Sewald. This is just like an example of kind of how this stuff gets put into action. Okay? Paul Sewald was with the Diamondbacks for the playoff run. He got traded at the deadline this year. Got to the big leagues in 2017 with the Mets. Was in the big leagues for basically almost all of 4 seasons from 2017 to 2020. Had a 5.5 ERA. Gave up a little over a hit an inning, right at about a strikeout inning. Okay, the Mets released him at the end of 2020. The Mariners signed him. Okay, he was with the Mariners up until the trade deadline this year. They traded him to the Diamondbacks. Okay, but since the Mariners picked him up in 2021, he's thrown 250 innings with under a 3 ERA, well under a hit an inning, and well over a strikeout. Okay, he's been one of the more dominant relievers in baseball. Okay, how did this happen? Okay, so if you look up top, look at his fastball before he got traded and after. Okay, the velocity went up a little bit, but not enough that it makes a huge difference. It's still an average to maybe even slightly below average fastball in the big leagues, velocity-wise. Okay, you look at his vertical break numbers. Okay, those numbers, like I just told you, right? 16 is average. You want to be ideally like 18 or better, or 10 or lower. He's like in no man's land at 13.5. So like you look at this and you're like, man, this guy. Not only does he have average velo, he's got pretty garbage fastball movement. Okay? What he does do, though, that's super unique is he throws from a really low slot. Okay? He's basically like almost like low 3/4 or even sideline. Okay? So what the Mariners realized was that even though he only gets 13 inches of induced vertical break, because it's coming from such a low slot, that appears to be much higher. Okay, that approach angle is super low. Okay, when he was with the Mets, he was pitching in the middle to the bottom part of the zone. Okay, way too much. You can look over there and you see like in 2018, like his fastballs were like in the middle of the zone. Okay, Mariners picked him up. They did a couple things. First thing they did is they got rid of the stuff that was no good. He was throwing a sinker. He was throwing a change. They weren't very good pitches. They got rid of it. Okay. They changed his slider a little bit. Instead of it, they gave it a little bit flatter with a little bit more sweep. Okay, but he became a 2-pitch guy, fastball, slider, because those were his 2 best pitches. Okay, they dropped his arm slot just a little bit, right, to really magnify the effect of that low release height. And then they told him, look, you've got to stop pitching in the middle of the zone. You got to start pitching up. Okay, so his average fastball height went up from like 2.5 feet to like 2.8. Right, you can see the difference there. And based on doing that, the guy went from a guy that got released to a guy that's like a borderline all-star and one of the better relievers in the big leagues. Okay, so that's the value that this stuff can have. Some of that stuff you can see with the naked eye. Some of it you can't. Obviously, having access to that stuff makes it easier to do some of these things. But again, even for you guys that don't have it, I just think having an understanding of what this stuff means and how it's being used can only help you in terms of having conversations with your players. That's it. Any questions? No? All right, awesome. Appreciate it, guys.